I was 17 years old and homeless on a Tuesday morning in June. Ms. Rodriguez handed me the yellow envelope at 6 a.m., her fingers trembling against the paper. The administrative office at Meadowbrook Children's Home smelled like stale coffee and cheap disinfectant, the same papery scent of hopelessness that had seeped into my clothes over 6 years. Outside the window, Portland was waking up under a sky the color of wet concrete. "There's a lawyer looking for you," she said, her voice soft with something that might have been pity or relief. I couldn't tell anymore. "An appointment at 10 o'clock, downtown." I had no family. I knew that the way I knew my own name, the way I knew the scar on my left palm from a kitchen accident when I was 9. My mother drowned when I was 6 years old. Her body pulled from the Willamette River on a morning I can't remember clearly anymore, just fragments of blue uniforms and someone's hand on my shoulder. My father existed only as a blank space on my birth certificate, a question mark I'd stopped asking about by the time I turned 12. No aunts, no uncles, no cousins who'd ever bothered to claim me. Ranger nudged my hand with his wet nose, his brown eyes fixed on my face with that particular border collie intensity that said he understood more than most people gave him credit for. He was the only thing I was allowed to take from this place, the only creature who'd chosen me instead of tolerating my presence. 3 years old, black and white coat glossy despite everything tail level and alert as he processed the tension in the room. "Just you and me now, boy," I whispered, my fingers finding the soft fur behind his ears. The morning passed in a blur of signatures and plastic bags. Everything I owned fit into a single backpack, 3 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, the astronomy book Miss Rodriguez had given me for my 16th birthday, and a photo of my mother I barely remembered. The other kids were at breakfast. I was grateful for that. Goodbyes had never been my strength. Lee Hartwell's office occupied the 3rd floor of a narrow building on Southwest Morrison Street, wedged between a coffee shop and a vintage bookstore. The sign on the frosted glass door read, "Hartwell and Associates, Estate Law," in understated letters. I pushed it open at 9:58, Ranger's leash wrapped tight around my wrist. She looked up from behind a desk buried in manila folders and leather-bound books. 32, maybe 33, with dark brown hair pulled back in a practical bun and reading glasses perched on her nose. Not what I'd expected. Lawyers on television were always older, sharper, dressed in power suits that cost more than most people's rent. Lee wore a simple blue blouse and had a coffee stain on her cuff. "Wren Ashford." She stood extending her hand. Her grip was firm, businesslike, but her eyes were kind. "Please sit. The dog is fine. I have water if he needs it." I sat. The chair was old leather, cracked at the arms, comfortable in a worn-out way that suggested generations of nervous clients. Through the window behind her I could see the street below, people rushing to work, to lives that made sense. "I'm sure you're confused," she said, settling back into her own chair. "You don't know me, and according to our records, you didn't know Dorothy Whitmore either." The name meant nothing. I shook my head. Lee pulled a folder from the stack, opening it to reveal documents I couldn't read upside down. "Dorothy Whitmore was your great-aunt, your grandmother's older sister. She passed away 3 months ago at the age of 76. Something cold settled in my chest. "I don't have any family." "You didn't know you had family," Lee corrected gently. "Your grandmother, Thomas Whitmore's wife, died when you were 2 years old. Dorothy lost touch with that side of the family after your grandmother's death. Or so we thought." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Dorothy never married anyone named Whitmore. She married Marcus Whitmore in 1975. They shared a surname by coincidence, not relation." "I don't understand." "Dorothy spent the last 30 years of her life on a private island in the San Juan Islands. Ashford Island, though it used to be called something else. 15 acres, mostly forested, with a small structure and outbuildings. She and Marcus were both aerospace engineers at Boeing. They retired in 1995 and bought the island for reasons they kept to themselves." Ranger shifted at my feet, sensing my confusion. I reached down absently, my hand finding his head. "Marcus died in 2018, Lee continued. "Dorothy lived alone on the island for 6 more years. She was—" Lee hesitated, then smiled slightly. "She was extraordinary, brilliant, stubborn, very private. When she passed, she left a will, a very specific will." She slid a document across the desk. Legal language swam before my eyes, dense paragraphs about assets and conditions and parties of the first part. But one section was highlighted in yellow. I leave the entirety of my estate, including Ashford Island and all structures and contents thereon, to my great-niece Wren Marie Ashford, blood of my blood, provided she fulfills the condition outlined in Section 4B. What condition? Lee's expression shifted to something I couldn't quite read. Concern, maybe, or calculation. You have to live on the island for 30 consecutive days, alone. Well, you can have Ranger, but no other human residents. If you complete the 30 days, the island becomes legally yours, free and clear. If you don't, the estate passes to Vincent Kane, Dorothy's nephew by marriage. The words hung in the air like smoke. An island, 30 days, alone. Why? My voice came out smaller than I'd intended. Dorothy didn't explain in the will, but she left letters, instructions. She wanted— Lee stopped, seemed to reconsider. She wanted someone worthy to inherit her life's work, whatever that means. I'm 17. The law allows for emancipated minors to hold property under specific circumstances. You turn 18 in October. The court has reviewed your case and approved the inheritance contingent on the 30 days and my temporary guardianship during that period. She leaned forward. Wren, I need you to understand something. Vincent Kane has already challenged this will. He claims Dorothy wasn't of sound mind when she wrote it. He wants the island badly enough to hire expensive lawyers and make this ugly. Who is he? Dorothy's husband Marcus had a nephew, Vincent. He's 35, runs a real estate development company, and he's been trying to get his hands on that island since Marcus died. Dorothy refused every offer. The island isn't worth much as land, but Vincent seems to think there's something valuable there. He won't tell me what. I looked down at Ranger at my backpack on the floor, at the entirety of my possessions contained in 17 years of institutional living. What if I say no? Lee's face softened. Then you walk away. Vincent gets the island and you go back to— She stopped. Where will you go, Wren? Nowhere. The answer echoed in the silence between us. At 17, aged out of the system, I had exactly nowhere to go. A shelter maybe, a halfway house. The street if things went badly. The arithmetic of homelessness was simple and cruel. When would I start? Today is June 15th. If you agree, I can have you on the island by this afternoon. The 30 days would end July 14th. I'll visit weekly to check on you, bring supplies, handle any legal issues. There's a satellite phone for emergencies, solar power, rainwater collection, basic amenities. Dorothy left the place functional. And if I make it 30 days, the island is yours, plus a small trust fund Dorothy set aside for maintenance and taxes. It's not a fortune, but it's enough. I thought about the streets of Portland, about shelters with their rules and their violence, about the long slide into invisibility that awaited kids like me. I thought about the Willamette River and my mother's body, and the way water had haunted my dreams for 11 years. An island surrounded by water. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'll do it. Lee's smile was small but genuine. I was hoping you'd say that. The ferry from Anacortes left at 1:30, cutting through water the color of polished steel under an overcast sky. I stood at the railing, backpack at my feet. Ranger pressed against my legs, trying not to look down at the waves. The crossing took 2 hours through a maze of islands, each one a different shade of green against the gray. Other passengers clustered inside the cabin, drinking coffee from paper cups pointing at eagles and seals. I stayed outside, breathing through my nose, fighting the nausea that had nothing to do with seasickness. Lee stood beside me, her hair whipping in the wind. She'd changed into practical clothes, jeans and a fleece jacket, hiking boots that had seen real use. Dorothy was remarkable, she said, pitching her voice above the engine noise. She was one of maybe a dozen women in Boeing's engineering program in the early 70s. Fought for every inch of respect. Designed components for aircraft that are still flying today. Why did she leave? Officially retirement. Unofficially. Lee shrugged. I think she got tired of fighting. She and Marcus wanted to build something together, something that belonged to them. So they bought the island and disappeared. For almost 30 years. They came to the mainland for supplies, saw doctors when necessary, but mostly they kept to themselves. People called them eccentric, hermits. After Marcus died, Dorothy became even more reclusive. I only met her twice, both times in the last year of her life when she was writing her will. What was she like? Lee considered this. Sharp, very sharp. Her mind was absolutely clear until the end. Cancer took her body but not her brain. She asked me 100 questions about you before she'd let me handle the estate. Your grades, your behavior reports from the home, whether you'd ever been in serious trouble. She glanced at me. You impressed her, Wren. Straight A's in math and science despite everything. No disciplinary issues. The staff said you helped the younger kids with homework, that you never started fights even when other kids provoked you. She knew about me. For at least 5 years, maybe longer. She hired a private investigator to find you after your grandmother died. She'd been watching from a distance, making sure you were all right. The information hit me like cold water. 5 years. While I'd been struggling through middle school, through the hell of being the weird, quiet kid with no family, someone had been watching. Someone had cared enough to check, even if she'd never reached out. Why didn't she contact me? Lee's expression turned sad. She was dying. She told me she didn't want you to watch another person leave. She'd rather give you something permanent, something you could build a life on. The ferry's horn blasted. San Juan Island appeared off the port side, all steep cliffs and dense forest. But we weren't stopping there. Lee pointed to a smaller shape in the distance, barely more than a dark smudge against the water. Ashford Island. We're catching a water taxi the rest of the way. The ferry doesn't stop at the private islands. The water taxi was a small motorboat piloted by a weathered man in his 60s who introduced himself as Captain Jim and didn't ask questions. He helped Ranger aboard with surprising gentleness, then offered me a hand I didn't take. The crossing from San Juan Island took another 20 minutes, the boat cutting through swells that made my stomach clench. And then we were there. Ashford Island rose from the water like something from a dream I'd had and forgotten. The beach was narrow, mostly rock and driftwood, leading up to a dense wall of Douglas fir and cedar. Through the trees I could see the curved metal roof of a structure, rust-colored and strange against the green. A Quonset hut, Lee had called it. World War II, surplus, repurposed by people who valued function over aesthetics. Captain Jim helped us unload supplies onto a small dock that had seen better decades. 3 boxes of groceries, a case of bottled water, extra batteries, a first aid kit. Lee had thought of everything. The boat pulled away, engine fading, leaving us in silence, broken only by waves and wind through the trees. This way, Lee said, shouldering one of the boxes. The path is maintained. She wasn't lying. Someone had cleared a trail from the beach wide enough for 2 people lined with stones to mark the edges. It wound up through the forest, rising gradually until we emerged into a clearing that stopped my breath. The Quonset hut sat in the center like a giant half-barrel, maybe 40 feet long and 20 wide, its corrugated metal skin streaked with rust, but structurally sound. Solar panels covered the south-facing side of the roof, wires running down to a battery bank housed in a weatherproof box. To the left stood a barn, smaller, wooden, leaning slightly but still standing. To the right, a stone fire pit surrounded by hand-carved benches. Everything was old but intentional, built by people who understood how things worked and how to make them last. "Home sweet home," Lee said quietly. The hut's door was unlocked. It swung inward with a metallic groan that echoed in the clearing. Inside, the air smelled like old metal and wood smoke and something else, something I couldn't name. The space was smaller than it looked from outside the curved walls, creating a cozy effect despite the industrial materials. One main room with a kitchenette, a wood stove, a single bed with a quilt that looked handmade, shelves lined with books, mostly technical manuals and field guides, a desk facing the window covered in notebooks and pencils, and a mechanical drafting set that must have been 40 years old. And photographs, dozens of them tacked to a corkboard above the desk. I moved closer, drawn by faces I'd never seen. A young couple in 1970s clothes standing in front of Boeing's Everett factory, the woman's dark hair pulled back, safety glasses perched on her head, a hard hat under her arm. Her smile was fierce and proud. The man beside her was tall, sandy-haired, his arm around her shoulders. The same couple, older, standing on this very clearing, the Quonset hut, newly built, paint fresh and unstained. Dorothy and Marcus, I realized, building their refuge. More photos showed the island changing. Gardens planted, the barn constructed, solar panels installed, Marcus graying, Dorothy's hair turning silver. Their hands in every image, working, building, creating. One photo near the bottom caught my attention. Dorothy alone, maybe 70 years old, standing beside the Quonset hut with a notebook in her hands and an expression I recognized. It was the same look I'd seen in my own mirror after acing a math test after solving a problem no one thought I could solve. Pure intellectual satisfaction. The joy of understanding something difficult. "She looked like you," Lee said from behind me. "Same coloring, same eyes." I hadn't noticed until she said it, but Lee was right. Dorothy's eyes in the photos were the same shade of green as mine, her hair the same auburn, even her freckles scattered across her nose in the same pattern. We could have been grandmother and granddaughter, in a way we were. "I need to get back to the mainland before dark," Lee said, checking her watch. "Are you sure about this, Wren? There's still time to change your mind." I looked around the hut, at the neat bed, the functional kitchen, the shelves full of knowledge, the windows that looked out onto trees and sky and nothing else. It was more than I'd had yesterday, more than I'd expected to have for years. "I'm sure. Satellite phone is on the desk. My number is programmed in. Emergency services too. Food should last 2 weeks. I'll be back next Saturday with more supplies." She hesitated. "The 30 days start now. Today, June 15th. You need to stay on the island continuously until July 14th. If you leave for any reason, even an emergency, the condition is broken." "I understand." Lee pulled an envelope from her jacket pocket. "Dorothy left this for you. She said to read it tonight after I left." She pressed it into my hands. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind people used for important things. My name was written on the front in careful script, Wren Marie Ashford. "Good luck," Lee said. Then she was gone back down the path toward the beach, leaving me alone with Ranger and a dead woman's legacy. The afternoon faded into evening. I explored slowly, methodically, the way I'd learned to approach new places. The hut's solar power worked, lights flickering on when I flipped switches. The water filtration system pulled rainwater from a cistern Marcus had built clean and cold. The wood stove was loaded with kindling ready to light. Every system had been maintained, kept functional even after Dorothy died. Someone had prepared this place for occupation. Outside I found a root cellar stocked with canned goods and preserves, a tool shed full of equipment I barely recognized, a path leading deeper into the island marked with stone cairns. Ranger explored everything with me, his nose working overtime, cataloging scents and memories embedded in the land. By the time darkness fell, I was exhausted. I lit the wood stove more for comfort than warmth, fed Ranger from the food Lee had brought, and made myself eat a can of soup I didn't taste. The envelope sat on the desk, waiting. I'd been avoiding it, afraid of what it might say, afraid of expectations I couldn't meet. Finally, I opened it. The letter was 3 pages long, handwritten in the same careful script as the envelope. Dorothy's voice came through, clearly, precise and warm, the voice of someone who'd spent a lifetime explaining complex things to people who didn't want to listen. "Dear Wren, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry we never met in person. I wanted to, but I was a coward, and by the time I'd gathered the courage, I was dying. Cancer, like so many women in my generation. The doctors gave me 2 years. I spent them preparing this place for you. I know you have questions. Why you? Why this island? Why the strange condition? Let me start with what I know about you. Your name is Wren Marie Ashford. You were born in Portland on October 12, 2006. Your mother, Anna Ashford, was my great-niece through your grandmother, my younger sister, Margaret. Anna died when you were 6. Your father was never in the picture. You've spent the last 11 years in the foster system, mostly at Meadowbrook. I found you when you were 12 years old. I hired an investigator after Margaret died, wanting to know if any family remained. He found you. I've been watching ever since from a distance, making sure you were safe. I saw your school records. Straight A's in math and science, struggling in English, not because you can't write, but because you think differently than the teachers expect. I saw the social worker reports. Quiet, keeps to herself, helps younger children, never starts conflicts. Resilient. That word, resilient. I hate it. They use it to describe children who survive trauma, as if survival is some kind of achievement instead of basic necessity. But I understand what they meant. You don't just survive, Wren. You persist. You solve problems. You care about others, even when no one has cared for you. You remind me of myself at your age. I grew up in Seattle in the 1950s, the daughter of a machinist and a school teacher. I wanted to build airplanes. People told me that was impossible. Women didn't become engineers. Women became secretaries or teachers or nurses. I ignored them. I studied physics and mathematics, graduated top of my class, and applied to Boeing's engineering program in 1970. They almost didn't hire me. Too small, too female, too likely to quit when I got married and had babies. I proved them wrong. For 25 years I designed components for commercial aircraft. I held patents, I won awards, and I was exhausted every single day fighting for respect, for recognition, for the right to do the work I was qualified to do. When Marcus and I bought this island in 1995, I told everyone it was retirement. That wasn't true. It was escape. We came here to build something corporations couldn't touch, couldn't corrupt, couldn't turn into profit margins. We came here to create. What we created is yours now, but you have to earn it. Not because I doubt you, but because you need to prove it to yourself. 30 days alone will teach you whether you can stand on your own, whether you can trust your own judgment, whether you belong here. If you make it through, everything on this island becomes yours. The land, the structures, the equipment, and the work. Our life's work hidden where only someone patient and curious will find it. Start in the attic. There's a chest. The key is in the barn inside a toolbox with a false bottom. Open the chest, read the journals, watch the videos, learn. And Ren, I believe in you. I believe in you the way no one believed in me until I forced them to. You are stronger than you know, smarter than they've given you credit for, worthy of more than the world has offered. Welcome home. Your great-aunt, Dorothy Whitmore. I read it 3 times, tears blurring the words by the end. She'd known, she'd watched, she'd cared. And she'd left me not just property, but purpose, not just survival, but meaning. Ranger whined softly, pressing his head against my knee. I buried my fingers in his fur, grounding myself in the warmth of living presence. The attic, a chest, a key in the barn. I stood legs unsteady and looked up at the ceiling. A ladder was bolted to the wall in the corner, leading to a hatch I hadn't noticed before. Ranger tilted his head, curious. I crossed to the ladder, gripped the rungs, and climbed. The hatch opened easily, swinging up on counterweighted hinges. Someone had engineered this, made it accessible. I pulled myself through into a space barely 5 feet high, lit by a single skylight that let in moonlight. The attic wasn't storage. It was a workspace, a drafting table, more shelves, and in the corner, exactly as Dorothy had promised, a wooden chest bound with brass fittings and a heavy padlock. No key, not yet. But beside the chest, as if waiting for me, was a leather-bound journal. The cover was worn smooth, the binding cracked with age. I picked it up, carefully opened it to the first page, and found Dorothy's handwriting again. Younger this time, the letters slightly less controlled. Journal of Dorothy Whitmore, March 1995. Marcus and I bought Ashford Island today. Everyone thinks we're crazy. 2 engineers retiring to the middle of nowhere. But I have a secret. I'm building something they said a woman couldn't build. I'm building the future. I turned the page. Sketches of the Quonset hut, plans for solar panel arrays, calculations for water collection and filtration. Dorothy had documented everything, every decision, every innovation. This wasn't just a journal. It was a technical manual written by someone who knew exactly what she was doing and wanted to teach someone else to do the same. I flipped forward, scanning entries. April 1995. June 1996. January 2000. The journal covered 5 years of work, of building, of creating this island sanctuary. And near the end, dated December 1999, one entry made me stop breathing. I wonder if Thomas's granddaughter survived. I tried to find her years ago after Margaret died, but the trail went cold. If she exists, if she's out there somewhere, I hope she's strong. I hope she knows that strong women don't just survive. We build things. If she ever reads this, I want her to know this isn't charity. This is legacy. I'm leaving this island to her because she deserves it, because she'll understand what it means, because she won't let corporations turn our work into weapons, because she's family. And family means believing in each other even when we've never met. The words blurred. I closed the journal, pressed it against my chest, and let myself cry for the first time since Ms. Rodriguez had handed me that envelope. Not from sadness, from recognition, from the overwhelming weight of being seen, being known, being chosen. Ranger barked from below, a single sharp note. I wiped my eyes, climbed back down the ladder, and found him at the door, tail wagging, ears forward. He needed to go out. Basic needs didn't stop for emotional revelations. I opened the door. The night air was cold and clean, smelling of salt and pine and earth. Stars scattered across the sky in patterns I'd only seen in books, unobstructed by city lights. The moon was nearly full, turning the clearing silver. Tomorrow I would find the key in the barn. Tomorrow I would open the chest and discover what Dorothy and Marcus had built together. Tomorrow I would start learning the systems that kept this island alive. But tonight I stood in the doorway of a metal hut on an island no one else wanted, with a dog who'd chosen me and a dead woman's belief in my potential, and I felt something I'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. Not the desperate kind that clings to impossible outcomes. The solid kind built on reality, on actual resources, on someone having thought about my future and prepared for it. I was 17 years old. I had 30 days to prove I belonged here. 30 days to transform from a homeless orphan into the inheritor of something extraordinary. I looked up at the attic hatch at the journal, waiting there at all the knowledge Dorothy had left behind. Strong women build things. I could learn to build. Morning arrived, cold and bright, the kind of June clarity that happens in the Pacific Northwest when the marine layer burns off early. I woke to Ranger's wet nose against my cheek and sunlight streaming through the Quonset hut's eastern windows. My neck ached from sleeping at the desk, Dorothy's journal still open beneath my cheek. I'd fallen asleep reading her entries, absorbing decades of technical observations and personal reflections written in that precise, unflinching hand. The barn. The key. Dorothy had said it was in a toolbox with a false bottom. I splashed water on my face from the cistern tap, fed Ranger from the supplies Lee had left, and forced myself to eat an energy bar that tasted like cardboard and determination. The barn stood maybe 50 yards from the hut, its weathered siding silvered with age, the whole structure leaning 3 degrees to the east, like it was listening to secrets the wind carried from the mainland. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and machine oil and something sharper underneath, like ozone before a thunderstorm. Workbenches lined the walls, their surfaces scarred with decades of use. Hand tools hung on pegboards in precise arrangements, each one outlined in faded marker so you knew exactly where it belonged. Marcus's doing, probably. Engineers loved systems. I found the toolbox on the third bench, red metal, scratched and dented, the kind of contractor's box that had seen real work. The false bottom wasn't hidden so much as assumed you'd look carefully. I pressed the corners in sequence and the base panel popped up with a soft click. The key lay cushioned in foam brass gone green with verdigris attached to a leather cord. Beneath it, a folded note in Marcus's handwriting, blockier than Dorothy's but equally precise. If you found this, you're paying attention. Dorothy always said the best inheritance is knowledge. The chest contains our life's work. Use it to build something that matters. M. W. Back in the hut. Climbing the ladder to the attic felt different this time. Purposeful. The chest waited in its corner, patient as geology. I fitted the key into the padlock and turned it. The mechanism resisted, then surrendered with a metallic sigh that echoed in the confined space. Inside, organized with the same methodical precision as the tools downstairs, I found Dorothy's legacy laid out like a curriculum. 15 journals, each one labeled with date ranges. A stack of blueprint folders, their vellum pages protected in plastic sleeves. 3 USB drives in a waterproof case labeled in Dorothy's hand, Fundamentals Advanced Systems Final Project. And on top of everything, a sealed envelope with my name written across it in letters 2 inches tall. I opened it with shaking fingers. Dear Wren, this is the second letter. If you're reading it, you found the key, opened the chest, and you're ready to learn. What Marcus and I built on this island took 20 years. Not the structures themselves, those went up in a few seasons. What took time was the innovation, the testing, the failures that taught us what wouldn't work, so we could discover what would. We came here in 1995 with a problem. The world runs on fossil fuels that poison the air and warm the oceans. Renewable energy exists, but remains inefficient, expensive, unreliable. Wind turbines need constant wind. Solar panels need constant sun. Water wheels need constant flow. No single system works everywhere always. So we asked a different question. What if you combined them? What if you could build a system that drew from multiple sources, stored energy efficiently, and scaled from a single home to an entire city? The answer is in this chest, in these journals, in the videos Marcus and I recorded for you, in the prototype we built beneath this island. But I won't just hand you the solution. You need to earn it. You need to understand it piece by piece, system by system. Start with the water wheel. then solar optimization, then wind capture. Build each component yourself. Fail. Figure out why. Succeed. Only then will you understand the whole. I've included video lessons. Watch them, follow the blueprints, use the tools in the barn. Your hands will blister, your back will ache, you'll want to quit. Don't. Because at the end of these 30 days you'll have something no one can take from you, the knowledge to build your own future. Start with USB Drive 1. Video File 001. Water Wheel Basics. Your Great-Aunt Dorothy P.S. I know you're afraid of water. I read the incident report about your mother. Build the water wheel anyway. The only way past fear is through it. The laptop Lee had provided sat on the desk downstairs, fully charged from the solar batteries. I plugged in the first USB drive with hands that wouldn't stay steady. The file directory showed 43 videos, each one numbered and titled 001-water_wheel_theory.mp4, 002-water_wheel_site_selection.mp4. On through the fundamentals of hydraulic power generation. I double-clicked the first file. Dorothy filled the screen, 75 years old in the video, her auburn hair gone mostly gray, but her green eyes sharp as broken glass. She sat at the barn workbench, safety glasses pushed up on her forehead, a model water wheel in her hands. Her voice came through the laptop speakers, clear and strong. "Hello, Wren. Yes, I know your name. I've known it for 5 years. We have a lot of work to do, so let's begin." She turned the model in her hands, showing its components. Water wheels are ancient technology. The Romans used them. The Chinese used them. They used them because the physics are simple and the results are reliable. Water flows downhill. Gravity pulls it. If you place an obstruction in the path, the water transfers its kinetic energy to the obstacle. If that obstacle is a wheel with paddles, the wheel spins. If the wheel is connected to a shaft, the shaft turns. If the shaft turns a generator, you get electricity. Marcus appeared at the edge of the frame, tall and gray-haired, wearing a plaid shirt rolled to the elbows. He handed Dorothy a wrench without being asked, their movements synchronized by decades of partnership. Dorothy continued, "The challenge isn't making a water wheel work, it's making it work efficiently. Paddle angle, water volume, flow rate, friction in the bearings, all of these affect your output. I spent 6 months getting our first wheel to generate stable power. You'll do it faster because I'm going to teach you what I learned." The video ran 47 minutes. Dorothy explained paddle geometry, bearing materials, optimal placement relative to water flow. Marcus demonstrated welding techniques for the frame. They showed me their mistakes, their revisions, their final design. And at the end, Dorothy looked directly into the camera with an expression I was learning to recognize as affection. "You can do this, Wren. I failed 47 times before I got it right. You're smarter than I was at your age. You'll do better." The screen went black. I sat in the silence of the hut, Ranger's head heavy on my feet, and felt something shift in my chest. She hadn't just left me property. She'd left me herself, her knowledge, her patience, her belief that I could learn what she'd spent a lifetime mastering. The creek that fed the island's water system ran through a ravine about a quarter-mile from the hut. Dorothy's journals included a hand-drawn map with the optimal location marked in red. I hiked there through forest that smelled like rain and earth, Ranger bounding ahead, and found her surveying stakes still in place after almost 30 years. The spot she'd chosen was perfect. The creek narrowed here, channeling water through a natural chute in the rock. Enough elevation drop to generate force, enough volume to sustain year-round flow. I could see why she'd picked it, could read the landscape the way she'd taught herself to read it. Building the wheel took 7 days. I watched Dorothy's videos each morning, took notes in a fresh journal I'd found in the desk, then spent daylight hours in the barn fabricating components from materials Dorothy and Marcus had stockpiled. Steel pipe for the axle, scrap metal sheeting for the paddles, bearings salvaged from old machinery. Every piece measured, cut, assembled according to blueprints I studied until I could see them with my eyes closed. My hands blistered the second day. By the 4th day, the blisters had burst and reformed as calluses. My shoulders ached from carrying materials through the forest. My lower back seized up from bending over the workbench. I learned to move differently, to lift with my legs, to take breaks before exhaustion made me sloppy. The first assembly attempt failed spectacularly. The paddles were angled wrong, creating resistance instead of capture. Water hit them and sprayed sideways, the wheel shuddering in its frame. I disassembled everything, recalculated the angles, rebuilt. The second attempt was better but still inefficient. The bearings created too much friction. The third attempt on day 6 produced a wheel that turned smoothly, steadily, converting the creek's energy into rotational force. Connecting it to a generator took another full day. Dorothy's video 006 walked me through the wiring, the voltage regulation, the battery array that would store excess power. When I finally flipped the switch and watched the multimeter needle swing into the green showing stable output at 12 volts, I heard myself make a sound somewhere between laughter and a sob. Electricity. Clean, renewable, self-sustaining. I'd built it with my own burned and bleeding hands. I called Lee that night from the satellite phone, my voice shaking with exhaustion and pride. She answered on the first ring. "Ren, everything all right?" "I built a water wheel. It works. It's generating power right now." A pause. Then her voice came back warm with something like respect. "Dorothy knew you could." "How did she know?" "She never met me." "She knew because she was you 50 years ago, a girl everyone underestimated who refused to accept limitations." Lee's tone shifted. "Listen, I need to warn you. Vincent Kane has been asking questions. He's hired someone to watch the island. A boat with cameras was spotted offshore yesterday. He's trying to document that you're not staying the full 30 days. My hands tightened on the phone. "I haven't left. I won't." "I know. But be careful. Vincent is desperate. Desperate people do stupid things." After we hung up, I stood at the hut's window and stared out at the darkness beyond the clearing. Someone watching. Someone waiting for me to fail. The thought made my skin crawl, but it also hardened something in my gut. Vincent Kane wanted this island. He wanted whatever Dorothy and Marcus had built here. He wasn't going to get it. The next morning, I started video series 2, Advanced Solar Optimization. Dorothy's solar panels predated modern technology by decades, but her engineering was sound. She'd built a tracking system that followed the sun's arc across the sky, maximizing exposure. She'd designed heat sinks that prevented efficiency loss from temperature. She'd wired everything in redundant circuits so a single failure wouldn't crash the whole array. I spent 3 days upgrading her original installation, replacing corroded connections, cleaning panels caked with a decade of needles and bird droppings. The output increased by 38%, enough to run the hut's lights and laptop and satellite phone without ever draining the batteries. But the real discovery came on day 12, June 26th, while I was exploring the forest looking for a site to build the wind turbine Dorothy's third video series described. Ranger found it. He'd been ranging ahead on the trail investigating scents only he could detect when he stopped suddenly and started digging at what looked like a solid patch of moss-covered ground. I called him back, but he ignored me, which was unusual enough to get my attention. When I reached him, I saw what his nose had detected. The moss wasn't growing on earth, it was growing on metal. A hatch maybe 3 feet square, set flush with the ground and camouflaged so well, I'd walked past it a dozen times without noticing. I scraped away the moss with my hands, revealing hinges and a keyhole. The same brass key that had opened the chest fit perfectly. The hatch lifted with surprising ease, counterweighted, revealing stairs cut into rock, descending into darkness. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't in the journals. Dorothy hadn't mentioned an underground structure. I pulled the flashlight from my pocket and started down. The stairs went deeper than seemed possible, maybe 20 feet, ending in a chamber that made me forget to breathe. 15 feet across, 10 feet high, the walls lined with pegboard and shelves and equipment that hummed with low electrical current. Workbenches held oscilloscopes and multimeters and tools I couldn't name. Battery banks lined one wall, their status lights glowing green. And in the center of the room, mounted on a reinforced platform, sat something that looked like it belonged in a museum of future technology. The generator. It stood maybe 4 feet tall, a cylinder of brushed steel wrapped in copper coils so precise they looked like art. 3 input ports labeled wind, water, solar fed into a housing that contained machinery I couldn't see. The output side showed a control panel with gauges and switches and a digital display currently reading 0. I circled it slowly, taking in every detail. The construction was flawless, the welds were invisible. The copperwork showed a level of craftsmanship that spoke to thousands of hours of patient labor. Dorothy and Marcus had built this. Together. Down here in secret, away from corporate eyes and government regulation and anyone who might want to take it from them. A laptop sat on a nearby bench, its screen dark but power light glowing. I touched the keyboard and it woke to show a single video file on the desktop. Generator_final_message.mp4. I pressed play. Dorothy appeared, but different this time. Older, thinner, her hair completely white, her face gaunt with illness. This video had been recorded recently, maybe weeks before she died. She sat in this very chamber, the generator visible behind her. "Ren." Her voice was weaker but no less determined. "If you found this place, you've learned the fundamentals. Water, solar, wind, you understand how each system works independently. Now I'm going to show you what happens when you combine them." She gestured at the generator. "This is 20 years of work. Marcus and I built it together, tested it, refined it. What you're looking at is a multi-source renewable energy system with a proprietary storage cell that maintains 94% efficiency. It can draw from wind, water, and solar, simultaneously store excess energy, and provide stable output regardless of environmental conditions. One unit this size can power 50 homes. Scale it up and you could power a city." Marcus's voice came from off-camera, rougher than in the older videos aged by time. "We turned down $300 million from a consortium of energy companies. They wanted to patent it, monetize it, control who had access. We said no." Dorothy nodded. "We said no because this technology belongs to humanity, not shareholders. But we couldn't just release the plans. Corporations would have weaponized them, turned clean energy into another monopoly." She leaned closer to the camera. "So we waited. We looked for someone with the intelligence to understand this, the integrity to protect it, and the courage to decide what should be done with it." Her eyes locked onto mine through the screen. "We chose you, Ren. Not because you're family, though you are. Not because we felt sorry for you, though your circumstances broke our hearts. We chose you because your school records and social worker reports showed us a girl who solves problems, who helps others, who doesn't quit when things get hard. You're what Dorothy Whitmore was at 17 before the world tried to beat it out of her." The video shifted. Marcus appeared on screen beside Dorothy, his arm around her shoulders. They looked tired, old, but utterly certain. Dorothy spoke again. "The 30 days aren't a test of endurance. They're a learning curve. By the time you finish, you'll understand every component of this system. You'll be able to build it, maintain it, improve it. And then you'll have to make the hardest decision of your life, what to do with it." Marcus: "You could patent it, make yourself wealthy. No one would blame you." Dorothy: "You could donate it to a university. Let researchers build on our work." Marcus: "You could keep it secret. Wait until the world is ready." Dorothy: "Or you could open source it, give it to everyone freely, and watch corporations try to stop something that belongs to all of humanity." They looked at each other, then back at the camera. Dorothy: "Whatever you choose, choose with your whole heart. This is your inheritance, your responsibility, your chance to change the world or preserve it or protect it until someone else can." The screen went black. I sat in the underground chamber for an hour, maybe more, staring at the generator and trying to comprehend what I'd inherited. Not just an island, not just knowledge, but a decision that would affect millions of people, that would determine whether clean energy became accessible or remained controlled by the same forces that had polluted the planet for profit. 17 years old, homeless 6 days ago, and now guardian of technology worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The absurdity should have been funny. Instead, it felt like gravity, like responsibility, settling onto my shoulders with physical weight. I climbed back to the surface as the sun was setting, sealed the hatch, carefully scattered fresh moss to maintain the camouflage. Ranger waited at the top, tail wagging, unconcerned with the magnitude of what I'd discovered. His simple faith steadied me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Dorothy's question: what would I do with the generator? The choice felt impossible. I was 17. What did I know about patents or corporations or changing the world? But Dorothy had been my age once. She'd made impossible choices and lived with the consequences. She'd believed I could do the same. The wind turbine became my focus for the next week. Dorothy's video series 3 covered everything from blade aerodynamics to tower construction to the delicate balance required to convert wind into rotational energy without the whole structure tearing itself apart in a gale. The work was harder than anything I'd attempted. The tower had to be 30 feet tall to clear the tree line and catch reliable wind. The blades had to be identical in weight and pitch, or the system would vibrate itself to pieces. The generator had to be weatherproof and lightning-resistant and capable of shutting down automatically in winds above 40 miles per hour. I fabricated the blades in the barn over 4 days using laminated wood and fiberglass resin, following blueprints so complex I had to watch Dorothy's demonstration 3 times to understand the geometry. Each blade was 8 feet long, curved like an aircraft wing, balanced to within a quarter ounce. Raising the tower nearly killed me. I'd built it in sections, planning to bolt them together vertically, but I'd underestimated the weight and overestimated my ability to manage a 30-foot pole that wanted to fall in unpredictable directions. On day 18, June 29th, I was 10 feet up on a ladder trying to secure the second section when my grip slipped. The pole swung wild, catching my shoulder and knocking me sideways. I fell. The impact drove the air from my lungs. Pain exploded through my lower back and left hip. I lay in the grass, unable to move. Watching Ranger's face appear above me, his eyes worried, his nose cold against my cheek. It took 10 minutes before I could sit up, 20 before I could stand. My whole left side throbbed with the kind of deep ache that promised bruising that would last weeks. But nothing felt broken. I'd gotten lucky. That night, lying in bed with ice wrapped around my hip, I cried for the first time since reading Dorothy's first letter. Not from pain, though that was real enough. From doubt. From the crushing weight of inadequacy. I wasn't an engineer. I was a kid pretending to be something I wasn't, playing at building things people with degrees and experience struggled with. I wasn't good enough. Dorothy had been wrong about me. Ranger curled against my side, his warmth a reminder that I wasn't completely alone. I buried my face in his fur and let the tears come until exhaustion dragged me into sleep. Morning brought stiffness, but also clarity. I limped to the laptop and pulled up Dorothy's video about tower construction again. This time I focused not on what she built, but on what she said. I failed 47 times before success. The first tower collapsed. The second twisted in high wind. The third worked for a week before a bearing seized and the whole thing nearly caught fire. I wanted to quit every single time. I didn't quit because Marcus reminded me that failure is just data. Every mistake teaches you what not to do next. The camera shifted to show Marcus working on a blade assembly. He looked up, saw the camera, and spoke directly to it. "Ren, you're going to fall. You're going to break things. You're going to hurt yourself. Do it anyway." The only difference between people who build things and people who talk about building things is that builders get back up. I watched the rest of the video with fresh eyes. Dorothy showed her failures, her calculations that hadn't worked, her designs that had seemed brilliant until reality proved them wrong. She wasn't superhuman. She was persistent, patient, willing to start over. I could be those things. It took me 3 more days to raise the tower correctly, using a pulley system Dorothy had mentioned in passing, and a ground anchor that distributed the weight. On July 2nd, day 18, I bolted the turbine assembly to the top and stepped back to watch the blades catch wind for the first time. They turned, slowly at first, finding their rhythm, then faster as the mechanism engaged. The generator hummed. The voltage gauge climbed. 12 volts, 15, 24 at peak rotation. More than enough to feed into the battery system. I'd built a functioning wind turbine from scrap materials and Dorothy's teachings. Me, Ren Ashford, the girl everyone had forgotten existed. I was still celebrating, still watching the blades spin against blue sky when I heard the boat motor. Vincent Kane stepped onto the dock 20 minutes later, flanked by 2 men who looked like they worked in gyms and got paid to intimidate people. He wore khakis and a polo shirt and an expression that said he owned everything he looked at. He smiled when he saw me. It wasn't a kind smile. "Ren Ashford, finally. I was beginning to think you didn't exist." My heart hammered, but I kept my voice level. "This is private property. You're trespassing. Dorothy's property, and the will is still being contested." He gestured at the clearing at the Quonset hut, at my wind turbine visible through the trees. "I have to say I'm impressed. My investigator said you've been busy. Solar upgrades, a water wheel, and now wind power." He laughed, short and sharp. "Playing engineer with Aunt Dorothy's toys." "They're not toys. No, they're valuable. More valuable than you understand." He took a step closer. Ranger growled a low sound in his chest. I'll make this simple. $50,000. Cash. You walk away, I get the island, everybody wins. The island is mine. Dorothy left it to me. Dorothy was dying. She wasn't thinking clearly. A judge will see that. His smile hardened. Or you could take the money. 50,000 is more than you've ever had. More than you'll see again. Buy yourself an apartment. Go to school. Live like a normal kid instead of playing wilderness adventure. Something hot flared in my chest. No. Think carefully. You're 17. Alone. How long before you get hurt, get sick, give up? What happens on day 20 when you realize you can't handle this? He gestured at the trees. Winter's coming in a few months. You really think you can survive out here? I'm handling it fine. Are you? He pulled a phone from his pocket, swiped through photos. Lee Hartwell visited you twice in 17 days. That's not living alone. That's getting help. The condition says no human contact. A good lawyer could argue you've already violated the terms. My stomach dropped. She's bringing supplies. That's allowed. Is it? Show me where the will says that. He pocketed the phone. Look, I don't want to fight you. You seem like a smart kid. Take the money. Make the easy choice. My answer is no. Leave. His expression shifted, friendliness evaporating. You're making a mistake. This island belongs in development hands. People who can make it profitable. What are you going to do? Sit here playing with Dorothy's science projects until you die? I didn't answer. Ranger pressed against my leg, solid and loyal. Vincent shook his head. Fine. When you change your mind, call Lee. She has my number. He turned, started back toward the dock, then paused. Oh, and Wren. Your little building projects. They're cute. But Dorothy and Marcus spent 30 years out here. You really think you have figured out what they were doing in 3 weeks? He was gone before I could respond. I stood in the clearing as the boat motor faded, shaking with adrenaline and fury and fear. He knew about the wind turbine, about the water wheel. He had someone watching, documenting everything. And he'd threatened to invalidate the will based on Lee's visits. I called her immediately. She answered with her usual efficiency. Wren. Vincent was here. He offered me money. He threatened to claim I violated the isolation requirement because you visited. A long silence. Then Lee's voice came back tight with anger. He's bluffing. The will allows for supply deliveries. Any judge would laugh him out of court. A pause. But he's escalating. That's not good. He knows about the systems I've built. Someone's been watching with cameras. From offshore, yes, that's legal. You can't stop him from observing from public waters. She sighed. Listen to me. You have 12 days left. 12 days until the island is legally yours and Vincent has no claim. Can you hold out that long? Yes. Then do it. Don't let him scare you. Don't leave the island for any reason. And Wren, her voice softened, be careful. Vincent wants something on that island badly enough to hire lawyers and investigators. I don't know what Dorothy and Marcus built, but it's important enough to fight over. After we hung up, I hiked back to the underground chamber and stood staring at the generator. This was what Vincent wanted. This technology worth hundreds of millions. He didn't know exactly what it was, but he knew enough to be dangerous. I spent the next 2 days checking every system, making sure everything worked perfectly. The water wheel hummed steadily. The solar panels tracked the sun. The wind turbines spun in the prevailing westerlies. All three fed power into the battery array, maintaining full charge with excess to spare. On July 5th, day 21, I woke to find the wind turbine wasn't turning. The blades hung motionless despite wind that should have been spinning them. I climbed the tower, my bruised hip protesting, and found the gearbox packed with sand. Someone had sabotaged it. Recently, while I'd been sleeping. Vincent or someone he'd hired had come onto the island and damaged my work. I climbed down, fury making my vision blur. The water wheel was next. I ran to the creek and found the paddles clogged with debris, sticks and mud jammed into the mechanism so it couldn't turn. 2 weeks of work destroyed in a single night. The solar panels were untouched, too visible, too risky. But the damage to the other systems was clear. This was a message. Vincent could reach me any time, could destroy anything, could make the island unlivable if I didn't surrender. I sat by the creek for an hour, Ranger beside me, fighting the urge to scream or cry or call Lee and beg her to make it stop. 9 days left. 9 days to fix everything and prove I could maintain this place. The alternative was giving up, letting Vincent win, letting Dorothy's belief in me become one more disappointment in a life full of them. I stood up. The sand came out of the gearbox with patient, methodical cleaning. The paddles cleared after 2 hours of work in water cold enough to numb my hands. By nightfall, both systems were running again, not as smoothly as before, but functionally enough. And as I watched the water wheel spin, I realized something that made me stop breathing. I hadn't needed the blueprints. I'd rebuilt from memory and understanding from knowledge internalized so deeply it had become instinct. Dorothy's lessons had worked. She'd taught me not just to follow instructions, but to comprehend the why behind every component, every connection, every design choice. I could build these systems now without her guidance. I'd earned the knowledge she'd promised I would. That night I stood in the underground chamber and read the control panel Dorothy had left for the generator. 12 steps to initialization. 12 precise actions that would activate 20 years of innovation and prove the technology worked. 9 days until the island became legally mine. 9 days until I could make the decision Dorothy had left in my hands. I touched the generator's smooth steel housing and felt the weight of the future pressing down like atmosphere, like responsibility, like the terrifying freedom of having choices that mattered. Somewhere on the mainland, Vincent Kane was planning his next move. Somewhere in her grave, Dorothy Whitmore was trusting me to make the right decision. Somewhere in my chest, a girl who'd been nobody was becoming someone who could build things, protect things, change things. I wasn't ready, but I was learning. And learning, Dorothy had taught me, was how you earned the right to matter. The final 8 days became a countdown measured in video lessons and sleepless preparation. Dorothy's last series of recordings covered generator initialization, and each one came with warnings that made my hands shake. Voltage spikes, thermal runaway, cascade failures that could turn the entire system into an expensive pile of slag if I miscalculated by even a decimal point. I watched the videos during daylight, took notes in margins and on loose paper, then spent evenings in the underground chamber cross-referencing Dorothy's instructions with the physical reality of switches and circuits and cooling systems. The generator wasn't just machinery, it was a test, a final exam disguised as engineering, and failure meant more than a bad grade. July 6th, day 22, 8 days remaining. The control panel Dorothy had designed showed 12 numbered positions, each one corresponding to a step in the activation sequence. Connect water wheel output. Sync solar array. Engage wind turbine feed. Initialize storage cell. The steps read like poetry if you understood the grammar of electricity and thermodynamics. But understanding wasn't the same as executing. One mistake in the timing, one reversed polarity, one overlooked connection, and I could overload the entire system. The battery banks would explode, the copper coils would melt. 20 years of Dorothy and Marcus's work would become smoke and regret. I ran simulations on paper drawing circuit diagrams until my pencil wore down to nothing. I traced wire paths in the chamber, verifying every connection matched the schematics. I tested each individual system in isolation, making sure water and solar and wind all fed clean power to their respective input ports. Ranger watched from the stairs, patient as stone, occasionally whining when I forgot to eat or sleep. He'd learned the rhythm of obsession, had seen it before in the weeks I'd spent building the turbine. This was different, though. This mattered in ways that transcended proving I could follow instructions. On day 24, July 8th, Lee made her weekly visit. She brought fresh supplies and news I didn't want to hear. Vincent filed an emergency injunction. He's claiming you're endangering yourself by staying here alone. He wants the court to force you off the island for your own safety. My chest tightened. Can he do that? The hearing is July 13th, day 29. She set down the grocery box, met my eyes. The judge will want proof you're safe, healthy, capable of sustaining yourself. I'm documenting everything, the systems you've built, the power generation, your physical condition. But Wren, if Vincent can show you're in danger, if he can prove Dorothy's condition was unreasonable, I have 6 days. 5 until the hearing. 1 more after that to reach the deadline. She glanced around the clearing, noting details I'd stopped seeing. The turbine is running well. Solar output, 38% above Dorothy's original installation. And the water wheel survived the sabotage. I nodded. Lee knew about the sand, the debris. She'd wanted to file charges, but proving Vincent had done it was impossible. No witnesses, no evidence beyond suspicious timing. 5 days, she repeated. Then you're free. The island is yours, and Vincent has no claim." She paused at the edge of the forest path. "What will you do with it after—" The question I'd been avoiding for 3 weeks. "I don't know yet." "Dorothy left you more than land, didn't she? I've seen the way you talk about her work. The reverence." Lee's expression sharpened with lawyer's instinct. "What did they build down here, Wren?" "Something that could change everything or nothing depending on who controls it." She studied my face, reading truth I wasn't speaking. "Be careful. Whatever it is, Vincent wants it badly enough to break laws. That kind of desperation makes people dangerous." After she left, I descended into the chamber and stood before the generator, trying to imagine what Dorothy would have done. She'd turned down $300 million to protect this technology. She'd lived in isolation, died without recognition, trusted a 17-year-old stranger to make the choice she and Marcus couldn't: patent it and become wealthy. Donate it to researchers. Keep it hidden. Open source it freely. Each option felt like a betrayal of someone, of Dorothy's ideals, of Marcus's pragmatism, of everyone who needed clean energy but couldn't afford it, of everyone who'd invested in fossil fuels and would fight to maintain their profits. I was 17 years old. 6 days ago, I'd been homeless. Now I held the future of renewable energy in my hands and had no idea what wisdom looked like. The next 3 days blurred into preparation that felt like prayer. I cleaned every connection in the chamber. I calibrated meters and checked voltage regulators and verified cooling systems. I ran through the 12-step sequence in my mind until I could recite it backward, until the movements became muscle memory waiting to happen. July 11th, day 27. 3 days from ownership, 2 days from the hearing. The weather shifted that morning, pressure dropping, wind picking up from the southwest. Ranger grew restless, pacing the hut, whining at the door. Animals knew storms before instruments did. I checked the barometer Dorothy had mounted on the wall and watched the needle fall into ranges that promised violence. By evening, the sky had turned the color of old bruises, purple-gray and swollen with intent. Rain began as I was securing loose equipment in the barn. Big cold drops that hit like accusations. I moved everything inside that could blow away, double-checked the turbine's automatic shutdown system, made sure the solar panels were locked in their storm position. The wind hit after dark, screaming through the trees with force that made the Quonset hut groan. Rain became hail ice pellets hammering the metal roof in percussion that drowned thought. I sat at the desk with Ranger pressed against my legs, watching lightning illuminate the clearing and stark white flashes, counting seconds until thunder arrived. The storm lasted 6 hours. When it finally passed around 3 in the morning, the silence felt unnatural, like the world holding its breath. I pulled on a raincoat and went outside with a flashlight to check for damage. The turbine had shut down correctly, blades locked in neutral position. The solar panels were intact. But when I hiked to the creek, nausea rising with each step, I found the water wheel twisted off its mount, paddles bent, the whole structure half submerged in flooding that had turned the gentle stream into a torrent. 2 weeks of work destroyed. Again. I stood in the dark rain dripping from my hood and felt something break inside my chest. Not the wheel. That could be rebuilt. What broke was the illusion that I could protect this place alone, that determination and knowledge were enough against nature and sabotage and the simple physics of wood and metal failing under stress. I was 17. I'd been foolish to think otherwise. Back in the hut, I pulled out the satellite phone to call Lee. My finger hovered over the button. She'd say the same thing she always said: "You can do this. You're stronger than you think. Dorothy believed in you." But Dorothy had been an adult with a partner and 30 years of experience. I had none of those things. I set the phone down. Ranger nudged my hand, his nose cold and wet. I scratched behind his ears and felt him lean into the touch, trusting completely. He didn't care about generators or inheritances or decisions that would affect millions. He cared that I was here, solid and present, his entire pack in one damaged person. Maybe that was enough. Maybe Dorothy's real gift wasn't the technology, but the lesson that you could survive being broken and still be worth something. I slept poorly, woke before dawn, and spent July 12th rebuilding the water wheel with materials I'd learned to shape like second language. The work went faster this time, my hands remembering angles and tolerances Dorothy had taught through repetition. By evening, the wheel turned again, not as smoothly as before, but functionally enough to feed power into the system. July 13th, day 29. The hearing and the final test. Lee called at 8 in the morning. "The judge wants to video conference with you at 10. Can you be ready? What do I need to say? The truth, that you're healthy, safe, capable, that you've maintained the property and yourself. Don't let Vincent's lawyer rattle you. Answer directly, don't elaborate. A pause. Wren, this is it. If the judge rules in your favor one more day and the island is legally yours, if he sides with Vincent, I know. At 10 o'clock, I sat at Dorothy's desk with the laptop positioned to show my face and the hut's interior behind me. The connection took a moment to establish, then a screen full of faces appeared. Judge Morrison, late 60s, black with the kind of eyes that had seen every variety of human nonsense. Lee in her office. And Vincent Kane with the lawyer who probably cost more per hour than I'd spent on food in a year. Judge Morrison spoke first, his voice carrying judicial authority through the laptop speakers. Ms. Ashford, good morning. I've reviewed the will of Dorothy Whitmore and the petition Mr. Kane has filed regarding your welfare. I'd like to ask you some questions directly. Yes, Your Honor. How long have you been living alone on Ashford Island? 28 days, since June 15th. And in that time, have you left the island for any reason? No, sir. Have you had visitors other than Ms. Hartwell's weekly supply deliveries? I thought about Vincent's confrontation about the sabotage. Mr. Kane came to the island once. He offered to buy it from me. I refused. He left. Vincent's lawyer leaned forward. Your Honor, if I may. Ms. Ashford is 17 years old, living without adult supervision in a remote location. This is inherently dangerous. The will's requirement is unreasonable and potentially harmful to a minor. Judge Morrison's expression didn't change. Ms. Ashford, have you been harmed or endangered during your time on the island? My ribs ached where I'd fallen from the ladder. My hands were scarred from metalwork and burns. I've had some minor injuries from construction work. Nothing serious? Construction work. I've been learning to maintain the property. Solar panels, a water wheel for power generation, a wind turbine. Dorothy left instructions. I've been following them. Vincent's lawyer smiled like he'd won something. Your Honor, this proves our point. A minor with no engineering training is attempting dangerous electrical work. She could be electrocuted, injured, or worse. Heat flooded my face. I haven't been attempting anything. I've succeeded. The systems I built are operational and safe. I understand the principles behind them because Dorothy taught me through videos and blueprints. I'm not playing. I'm learning. Judge Morrison leaned back in his chair. Ms. Hartwell, you've inspected the property weekly. Is Ms. Ashford's description accurate? Lee's voice came calm and professional. Completely accurate, Your Honor. Wren has demonstrated remarkable competence. The solar array produces 38% more power than the original installation. The water wheel and wind turbine are properly constructed and maintained. The property is in better condition now than when she arrived. Mr. Kane, the judge turned his attention to Vincent. What is your specific concern here? If Ms. Ashford is safe and the property is being properly maintained, what standing do you have to challenge Dorothy Whitmore's clearly stated wishes? Vincent's lawyer jumped in. Ms. Whitmore was terminally ill when she wrote this will. Her judgment was compromised. The conditions she imposed are unusual and suggest diminished capacity. Dorothy Whitmore was evaluated by 2 physicians in the month before her death. Both certified her as mentally competent. Do you have evidence to the contrary? Judge Morrison's tone suggested he already knew the answer. The lawyer shifted. We believe the condition itself demonstrates impaired judgment. Requiring a minor to live alone for 30 days is unusual but not illegal. Mrs. Ashford is 17 and will be 18 in October and has demonstrated capability beyond many adults I've encountered. The judge looked directly at the camera, directly at me. Ms. Ashford, one question. Do you want to be on that island? The question cut through legal maneuvering to something true. Yes, Your Honor. More than anything. Why? Words I'd been thinking for 28 days crystallized into something I could speak. Because Dorothy saw something in me worth believing in. Because she left me not just property but purpose. Because for the first time in my life I'm building something that matters instead of just surviving until tomorrow. Silence on the video call. Then Judge Morrison nodded. The petition is denied. Ms. Ashford, you have one more day to fulfill the conditions of the will. I expect to see you in my courtroom on July 15th to finalize ownership transfer. He looked at Vincent. Mr. Kane, if you continue to harass this young woman, I will hold you in contempt. Do we understand each other?" Vincent's face had gone red, but he managed to force out a civil response. "Yes, Your Honor." The screen went black. I sat staring at the laptop, heart hammering, hardly believing it had worked. One more day, 24 hours. Then the island was mine, and Vincent had no claim, no leverage, no way to take it from me. Lee called 30 seconds later. "You did perfectly. One more day, Wren. Just one more." He's not going to give up. He doesn't have a choice. The law is clear. Tomorrow at midnight the 30 days are complete. After that he can file all the lawsuits he wants, but the property is yours. She paused. "Be careful anyway. Desperate men do desperate things." I spent the afternoon in the underground chamber running through the activation sequence one final time. Tomorrow I would own this island, this technology, this impossible decision. Tomorrow I would have to choose what to do with something worth more than most people earned in lifetimes. But tonight I needed to prove the generator worked. Not just to myself, to Dorothy, to justify the trust she'd placed in a stranger. The sun set. I made dinner, mechanically ate without tasting. Ranger sensed my tension, stayed close, his presence grounding. At 9 o'clock I heard the boat motor. Vincent had come back. I moved to the window and watched 3 men approach through the trees, flashlights cutting the darkness. Vincent in front, 2 larger men flanking him. Not investigators this time. Muscle. People who got paid to make problems disappear. Fear turned my stomach to ice. I grabbed the satellite phone, dialed Lee's number. It rang once, twice. Her voicemail clicked on. I tried 911. The call wouldn't connect. No signal. Vincent must have brought a jammer. Ranger growled, hackles raised. I put my hand on his collar, holding him back. 3 against 1, 4 if you counted a dog. I couldn't fight them. Couldn't run. The only advantage I had was knowledge they didn't possess. Vincent's fist hammered on the door. "Wren, I know you're in there. We need to talk." I stayed silent, mind racing through options that all ended badly. "The judge's ruling doesn't mean anything. You understand that, right? Tomorrow you turn 18 in the eyes of the law, but you're still a kid, still vulnerable." His voice turned oily with false concern. "What happens in winter when the storms get serious? What happens when you get sick? You'll die out here alone." "I'm not alone." The words escaped before I could stop them. "Right. The dog. That's comforting." A pause. "I'm going to make this very simple. Let me in, sign the property over, take the money. Or my associates here make you leave. Your choice." I backed away from the door, pulled the generator schematics from the desk drawer, and moved to the attic ladder. If Vincent broke in, if he searched the hut, he'd find Dorothy's journals and blueprints. But he wouldn't find the chamber entrance. Not tonight. Not if I could help it. The door exploded inward, the lock no match for a boot backed by 200 pounds of intent. Vincent stepped inside, his 2 men behind him, and found me halfway up the ladder with Ranger barking fury at its base. "There she is. See, Marcus told you she hadn't run." Vincent smiled, but his eyes were cold. "Come down, Wren. Let's talk like adults. You broke into my house, Dorothy's house, and the will is being contested. Remember, right now this is disputed property." He moved closer, his men spreading to cut off escape routes that didn't exist. "You've been busy. Solar, wind, water. Very impressive for a high school dropout." I didn't drop out. I aged out of the system. "Semantics." He reached the base of the ladder. "Come down. We're going to have a conversation about what Dorothy really left you." I climbed higher instead, pulling myself into the attic, dragging the schematics with me. Vincent cursed and started up behind me. I grabbed the first thing my hand found, a metal thermos Dorothy had left on a shelf, and threw it at his head. It missed, clanging off the ladder, but made him duck. "Careful. You could hurt someone." His voice dripped sarcasm. Ranger's barking reached a fever pitch below. One of Vincent's men yelped, and I heard the scuffle of a dogfight. My heart seized. If they hurt Ranger, call your dog off or I'll have Marcus shoot it. The threat cut through everything else. "Ranger down, come." The barking stopped. I heard whimpering. Alive. He was alive. Vincent pulled himself into the attic, breathing hard. "Smart girl. Now where is it?" "Where's what?" "Don't play stupid. Dorothy spent 30 years on this island. 2 Boeing engineers retire to the middle of nowhere and build solar panels. Wind turbines. That's prep work. That's infrastructure for something bigger. He grabbed my arm, fingers digging into muscle. Marcus and I used to talk before he died. He hinted they were developing something revolutionary. Energy storage, he said. A system that could change everything. Where is it? I tried to pull free. His grip tightened. I don't know what you're talking about. Liar. You've been down there, haven't you, underground? I've seen the thermal imaging. There's a chamber somewhere on this island, and you know where it is. My silence answered him. His smile returned ugly with triumph. Take me to it, now, or I have one of my friends hurt your dog while you watch. The choice wasn't a choice. I led him down the ladder through the hut out into darkness that felt like judgment. Ranger limped beside me, favoring his left foreleg. One of Vincent's men had kicked him. Rage burned in my chest, but rage without power was just heat. We moved through the forest, flashlights bobbing. I took them the long way, buying time I didn't know how to use. The hatch materialized under my feet, moss-covered, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Open it. I produced the brass key, fitted it into the lock. The hatch lifted. Vincent's flashlight beam stabbed down into the chamber, illuminating stairs and equipment, and the generator waiting in patient silence. Holy shit! He started down before I could react. Marcus, you're seeing this? This is what they built. This is what that crazy old woman kept hidden. I followed, stomach churning. Ranger stayed at the top, whining. Vincent reached the generator and circled it like a predator evaluating prey. His hands traced copper coils, tested switches, examined the control panel with an engineer's eye. This is worth millions, tens of millions, maybe more if the efficiency is what Marcus claimed. He looked at me with something approaching respect. You actually figured out how to maintain it. Dorothy taught me. Through what, videos from beyond the grave? He laughed. Doesn't matter. Here's what's going to happen. You sign over the property tonight. My lawyers have the papers ready. I'll give you 100,000 instead of 50. That's generous considering you have no leverage. The island becomes mine in... I checked the watch Dorothy had left waterproof and still keeping time. 6 hours. You can't make me sign anything. Can't I? He nodded to his men. They moved to block the stairs. My heart slammed against my ribs. Think. Dorothy had taught me to think, to see systems and connections and solutions hiding in plain sight. The generator sat dormant, waiting for activation. The control panel showed 12 steps. I knew them by heart. If you want this generator, I heard myself say, you need to know how it works. One wrong move and the whole thing becomes scrap metal. Vincent's expression shifted to uncertainty. You're bluffing. Dorothy spent 20 years building this. You think she didn't include safeguards? I moved to the control panel. Thermal sensors, overvoltage protection, automatic shutdown if initialization goes wrong. Try to force it and you'll destroy the very thing you're stealing. Then you'll activate it. Now, prove it works. My hands shook as I reached for the first switch. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. Dorothy had imagined me making this choice freely, thoughtfully, with wisdom I hadn't earned yet. Not with men threatening violence and time running out and fear making every thought sharp as broken glass. But maybe this was exactly how it had to be. Maybe the point wasn't making the perfect choice, but making any choice when the world gave you no good options. Step 1. Connect water wheel output. The switch clicked home. Gauges flickered to life, showing voltage from the creek-powered system flowing into the storage cell. Step 2. Sync solar array. Even in darkness, the batteries held charge from daylight hours. Another switch. The needle climbed. Step 3. Wind turbine engagement. The night was still, but the turbine's momentum systems held residual energy. Power trickled in less than the others, but stable. Vincent watched, mesmerized. It's actually working. All 3 sources feeding simultaneously. Step 4. Storage cell initialization. This was where it got dangerous. The proprietary system Dorothy and Marcus had developed operated at voltages that required precise calibration. Too fast and the cell would overheat. Too slow and the charge would destabilize. I adjusted the dial with hands that had steadied, somehow muscle memory taking over when conscious thought failed. The temperature gauge climbed. 30 degrees, 40, 50. Dorothy's notes said 65 was optimal. Push past 75 and the whole thing could rupture. Step 5 through 11 blurred together. Cooling systems, circuit verification, voltage regulation, each one a small decision that compounded into systemic stability or catastrophic failure. Sweat ran down my back despite the chamber's coolness. Vincent breathed down my neck, his presence a pressure I couldn't afford to acknowledge. Step 12. Full power engagement. My finger hovered over the final switch. Once I flipped it, the generator would prove Dorothy's theory. Multi-source renewable energy with efficiency high enough to make fossil fuels obsolete. Technology worth fortunes. Technology Vincent would steal and sell and turn into exactly the monopolistic nightmare Dorothy had refused to create. Or I could sabotage it. Throw the wrong switch. Overload the cell. Destroy everything to keep it from him. Dorothy's voice echoed in memory. Whatever you choose, choose with your whole heart. I flipped the switch. The generator hummed to life, a sound like the future being born. Lights flickered across the control panel. The digital display, dark for decades, illuminated with numbers that made Vincent gasp. 94% efficiency, 52 kilowatts output, stable across all three input sources. Clean energy pouring from water and sun and wind into a system that could scale to power cities. It worked. Dorothy and Marcus had been right, and I'd proven it. Vincent grabbed my shoulder, spinning me around. You did it! You actually did it! His face was alight with greed and wonder and calculation. Do you understand what this means? We can patent this. Sell it to energy companies. Make billions. That's exactly what Dorothy refused to do. Dorothy was an idealist who died alone on an island. I'm a realist who sees opportunity. He pulled papers from his jacket. Sign, transfer the property. I'll cut you in for 10%. You'll be rich, Wren. Richer than you ever dreamed. I looked at the generator, its coils glowing faintly with contained energy. At the chamber, Dorothy had carved from rock. At the laptop, showing Marcus's final video frozen mid-sentence. At everything two people had built together because they believed humanity deserved better than what corporations offered. No. Don't be stupid. You're 17. You can't protect this. You can't commercialize it. You can't even afford to patent it. Sign the papers or I take it anyway and you get nothing. Sirens cut through his words, distant but approaching. Multiple vehicles, their wails carrying across water. Vincent's face went white. What did you do? The generator has a silent alarm. Dorothy programmed it to contact Coast Guard if activated under duress. She was paranoid about corporate theft. I was lying and venting on the fly, but Vincent didn't know that. They're coming. You broke into my house, threatened me, tried to force me to sign fraudulent documents. That's multiple felonies. He stared at me, then at his men, then at the stairs leading up to freedom that was evaporating with each siren wail. You're bluffing. There's no alarm. The sirens grew louder. Stay and find out. Vincent ran. His men followed, boots pounding up the stairs, flashlights disappearing into the night. I heard their boat motor roar to life, heard them flee across water like the criminals they were. I sagged against the workbench legs, suddenly unable to hold me. The sirens were real. I hadn't called them because Vincent had jammed the phone, but someone had. Lee may be checking on me when I didn't answer. Or a neighbor who'd seen the boat heard the commotion. Ranger limped down the stairs whimpering and pressed himself against my legs. I dropped to my knees and buried my face in his fur, letting the fear and adrenaline and relief pour out in shaking sobs. We'd survived. Vincent was gone. The generator hummed steadily, indifferent to human drama, doing exactly what Dorothy had designed it to do. Coast Guard arrived 20 minutes later with Sheriff Thompson from San Juan Island. They found me sitting on the hut steps with Ranger, my hands still shaking trying to explain what had happened. Vincent's boat was already gone, disappeared into the maze of islands, but they'd gotten a description, a license plate from the trailer at the marina. Sheriff Thompson was in his 50s, weathered and competent. Ms. Hartwell called us, said you'd missed a scheduled check-in. We were coming anyway when we saw the boat leaving at high speed. He noted my disheveled appearance, Ranger's limp. You hurt? Scared, but not hurt. The men who were here, I told the story. Vincent's arrival, the threats, the attempted coercion. I didn't mention the generator or what it did. That was mine to reveal or protect Dorothy's legacy and trusted to my judgment. They documented everything, photographed the broken door, took statements. By the time they finished, dawn was breaking over the water, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. July 14th, the deadline day. In 18 hours, the island would be legally mine, and Vincent Kane would be facing charges that ended his claim permanently. Sheriff Thompson paused at his boat. You're tougher than you look, Ms. Ashford. Most people would have folded. Dorothy taught me that women who build things don't fold. They finish what they started. He smiled. She'd be proud. After they left, I descended into the chamber one more time. The generator still ran, still produced power at efficiency levels that would revolutionize energy production if released. I stood before it and felt the weight of Dorothy's questions settle on my shoulders with new clarity. What would I do with this? I thought about Vincent's offer. 10% of billions, enough money to never worry again, enough to buy security and comfort and everything foster care had taught me to crave. I thought about keeping it secret, living on the island using the power, never telling anyone what existed here. Safe, simple, selfish. I thought about patenting it myself, becoming the inventor, the owner, the one who controlled access. Power in a different sense. But mostly I thought about Dorothy at 17 fighting for the right to learn engineering when everyone said women didn't belong in that world. About her spending 20 years developing something beautiful and refusing to let it be corrupted. About her trusting me, a homeless kid with nothing but potential, to make the choice she couldn't. I knew what I had to do. At midnight, 30 days exactly from when I'd arrived, I stood on the beach with Lee Hartwell and signed the papers that made Ashford Island legally mine. 15 acres of forest and rock and innovation, the Quonset hut, the barn, the systems I'd built and maintained, and beneath it all Dorothy's legacy waiting for me to decide its fate. Lee produced champagne plastic cups, a smile that said she knew how rare this victory was. To Dorothy Whitmore, and to Wren Ashford, who proved her right. We drank. The champagne tasted like carbonated hope. "What now?" Lee asked. "The island is yours. What are you going to do with it?" I pulled an envelope from my pocket, the decision I'd written out in Dorothy's own hut while waiting for midnight. "I want to donate the generator to MIT. Full schematics, video documentation, everything Dorothy left. With 2 conditions." Lee's eyebrows rose. "Which are?" "First, the research has to be open access. No patents, no monopolies. Anyone who wants to build this can access the plans freely. And second, MIT offers me admission, full scholarship. I want to study engineering, learn what Dorothy knew, continue the work she started." I met Lee's eyes. "Can you make that happen?" She read the envelope, scanning legal language I'd cobbled together from Dorothy's notes and my own desperate hope. "This generator, how revolutionary is it? It could change everything, if it's protected correctly." Lee's smile turned fierce. "Then yes, I can make this happen. MIT will jump at this. The technology alone is worth hundreds of millions in research grants. And Wren," she gripped my shoulder, "Dorothy would be so proud of you." 6 months later, December 24th. I stood in the Quonset hut during winter break from MIT. 18 years old now, legal in every sense but feeling younger than I had at 17. Campus life had been overwhelming at first, too many people, too much noise. But the engineering program welcomed me like I'd been waiting my whole life to arrive, and the professors who reviewed Dorothy's work treated it and me with reverence that still surprised me. The generator had been delivered to MIT in August with full documentation. Research teams were already building prototypes, testing scaling models, publishing papers that credited Dorothy Whitmore and Marcus Whitmore as the original inventors. I was listed as contributor, which felt more honest than claiming ownership of genius that wasn't mine. The island in winter was different from the island in June, harsher, quieter. Snow dusted the trees and frost made the beach stones gleam like jewels. Mrs. Beatrice Walsh, my neighbor from San Juan Island, had been checking on the property, weekly feeding Ranger when I couldn't be here. He'd grown older in 6 months, moved a little slower, but his joy at my return was undiminished. Vincent Kane had been convicted of trespassing, attempted fraud, and assault. He'd received 2 years in minimum security prison and a lifetime ban from practicing real estate development. The prosecutor had called it lenient. I'd called it justice. I spent Christmas Eve cleaning the hut, organizing notes, reading through journals I'd missed during my frantic month of learning. And in the bottom of Dorothy's chest, beneath papers and blueprints I'd already memorized, I found a false bottom identical to the one in the barn toolbox. My hands trembled as I pressed the corners. The panel popped free. Inside lay a single envelope with my name written across it in letters that wavered slightly as if Dorothy's hand had been shaking when she wrote them. The paper was marked, "Open First Christmas." I sat on the bed and broke the seal with fingers that remembered everything about the woman I'd never met. "Dear Wren, Merry Christmas, sweetheart. If you're reading this, you succeeded. The island is yours. The generator works. I'm so incredibly proud. I need to tell you something I couldn't say in the earlier letters. I was afraid you'd think it was manipulation or pity or something other than truth. I knew about you for longer than I admitted. Not 5 years. 12 years. Since you were 6 years old, since your mother died and the social workers took you into the system. I watched you grow up from a distance. I couldn't reach out. I was too much of a coward, too afraid of loss, too damaged by Marcus's death to risk loving someone I might lose. So I watched. I saw you struggle. I saw you persist. I saw you become someone remarkable despite every disadvantage the world handed you. You were never a stranger to me, Wren. You were the daughter Marcus and I never had. You were the future I was building for the reason I refused to give the generator to corporations. Because you deserved a world that ran on clean energy and justice, not profit and exploitation. The scholarship wasn't just prepared. I donated $2 million to MIT's engineering program, specifically for you 5 years ago with instructions to keep it confidential until you applied. It was always guaranteed. I wasn't leaving your future to chance. I'm sorry I never met you. I'm sorry I was too afraid to be the family you needed, but I hope the island and the knowledge and the choice I left you amount to something like love. Because I did love you, Wren. The way you love someone whose potential blazes so bright it hurts to look at directly. Build things, teach others, be the engineer I was and better than I ever managed. And remember that strong women don't just survive. We create futures worth inheriting. Merry Christmas, sweetheart. You're never alone. You're everything I believed you would be. With all my love, Aunt P.S. Check my garden behind the barn. One more gift. I couldn't see through tears. Couldn't breathe through the ache expanding in my chest. Dorothy had known, had watched, had loved me for 12 years while I'd struggled alone, thinking no one cared whether I existed. I stumbled outside Ranger, following through snow to the back of the barn where I'd never thought to explore. A greenhouse stood there, small and weatherproof, its panels frosted but intact. Inside, Dorothy's flowers still grew under automated lights fed by hydroponic systems that must have cost a fortune to engineer. Roses in December, lavender blooming out of season, a garden impossible and perfect. At the center, a stone marker I'd never seen words carved deep enough to last centuries. Dorothy Whitmore, 1948 to 2024. Engineer, inventor, mentor. And Marcus Whitmore, 1946 to 2018. Partner in life and innovation. Together in eternity. Dedicated by Wren Marie Ashford. The daughter we chose, December 2024. The stone had been prepared, waiting for me to find it. Waiting for me to understand that I'd been chosen not randomly but deliberately. That everything Dorothy left me was an act of love disguised as inheritance. I collapsed in the snow beside the marker, pressed my hand against stone still warm from greenhouse heat, and wept for the family I'd found too late to thank. Ranger pressed close, his warmth reminding me that I wasn't alone, had never truly been alone. Above me, wind chimes. Dorothy had hung years ago, rang softly, metal touching metal in harmonies that sounded like voices I'd never heard speaking words I understood anyway. Welcome home, they said. You did well. Keep building. I stayed there until the snow soaked through my jeans and the cold made my bones ache. Then I stood, brushed frost from Dorothy's stone, and walked back to the hut with Ranger. Inside, I opened a fresh journal and wrote on the first page in handwriting that looked almost like Dorothy's, all these weeks of copying her notes having shaped even my letters. Journal of Wren. Marie Ashford. Continuing the work of Dorothy and Marcus Whitmore. December 24th, 2024. I'm 18 years old. I have a home, an education, a purpose, and the memory of people who believed I was worth something. I'm not going to waste any of it. Ranger barked once, tail wagging. I scratched his ears and smiled through tears that weren't sad anymore, just grateful. Okay, boy, let's get to work. Outside, the generator hummed in its underground chamber, powering systems that would outlast me. The water wheel turned in the creek. Solar panels tracked invisible sun behind winter clouds. Wind turbines waited for storms that would come and pass and come again. The island breathed. Dorothy's legacy lived. And I, Wren Ashford, orphan and engineer and inheritor of impossible things, had finally found what I'd been searching for my entire life. Not just a home. A reason to build one. Not just survival. The knowledge that survival was only the beginning and everything after was mine to create. Strong women build things, and I was just getting started.